in conversation with Karen E. Osborne. Karen E. Osborne is an award-winning and Amazon Kindle best-selling author of five suspense novels, Reckonings, award-winning family saga and suspense, Tangled Lies, award-winning murder mysteries, Getting It Right, recognized by SS Magazine as a best read, True Grace, award-winning historical fiction inspired by a grandmother set in 1924 Harlem, New York, and Justice for Emerson, a dual timeline murder mystery due out March 13, 2025. Karen believes in generosity and giving back. She hosts a weekly video podcast, What Are You Reading? What Are You Writing? Supporting fellow authors. She is on the board of director of Easterseals Florida, helping the differently abled, is an elder in our church, volunteers for several professional organizations, supporting non-profit, and feeds the hungry and unhoused every week. Native New Yorker living in Florida, Karen and her husband, Robert, have two grown children and three grandsons. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today Karen E. Osborne. Welcome on the show, Karen.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Very, very excited to have you on the show today and to know you've got quite a lot of things even ongoing in the literature world and author world in terms of interviewing fellow authors and also you having your own book. It's quite exciting. I'm excited to have you on the show today. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. So, Karen, I need to first say that I found the description page of your book, True Grace, a black woman's journey to save her family on Amazon to be quite pulling, very captivating, and awesome. And I would like to ask you as to how the book came about, because knowing that the book was inspired by your grandmother, it's something quite exceptional to me. I would like to ask you also, and what is the premise of the book? I think I've got a lot in there
Yeah,
already.
so thank you so much for asking me. My grandmother was an extraordinary woman,
Mm,
and the book True Grace, this beautiful cover, is set in 1924. But Grace is, and by then, when you meet her in the opening chapter of True Grace, she's 27 years old,
mm,
and she'd already lived an extraordinary life. She
mm,
was born in the Congo, left by a white explorer and missionary and a black and African mama, and then was educated in England,
wow,
married in Jamaica, and now we find her in New York City.
wow,
27, mother of five children. She'd already lost three children, which wasn't uncommon in those days, but
wow.
it was still painful and retching, really a hard thing.
Yeah.
And so now we meet her. She has five children. She has all white hair. The traumas of her life had already turned all of her hair white
Mm,
down to her back. It came all the way down to her back. And we meet her in the first chapter. She'd made peace. She'd
mm,
made peace with all the trauma, everything that had happened to her.
wow,
All she was focused on is giving her children a better life. And we meet her. She comes home from running errands. She was unexpectedly returned home from running errands, and she opens her door, and something devastating,
mm,
devastating, she's confronted with. The opening line of this book, the very opening line of the first chapter, is the first time my husband died.
mm,
First time my husband died, I felt fear, shame, and guilt. The second time he died, and then just ellipse.
wow,
So the story is how she overcomes this devastation, fights to keep her family. Chapters are short. It's a fast moving story, which is unusual in historical fiction. And but it's the way I write, short chapters, one crisis after another.
mm,
And there's always in my book some romance, not an easy romance, and a romance with some trouble, but I always like the very strong and amazing women in my stories to find
interesting.
love.
I need to say that your description of this particular book, in terms of the inspiration behind it, sounds to me to be quite very wholesome, quite pulling, and very emotional, yeah? And to know that you have a bit of suspense, a bit of romance in there, they are not the trouble type, sounds quite amazing as well. I love your description of this. Very great. And I need to say thank you for sharing with us. Yeah,
Can I show you one other thing
please do.
about True Grace?
Yeah.
So her father, I changed all the names, and the book is fiction. But her father really was my great grandfather really was an explorer in Africa.
Mm.
And I have all of these books written about him. So I
Wow.
had all of this firsthand source material,
Mm.
plus 300 copies of 300 pages of handwritten letters that my grandmother wrote, plus, visits with her. So while the story is fiction and I had to make up a lot of stuff, which I love doing, I love making up stuff.
Mm.
But I also had there's a lot of truth in the book and a lot of real
Mm.
things that happened. And the baby in the book, her youngest child, is my father.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
amazing to know. I love your description of this. I mean, this is getting me to fall in love with historical fiction. This is very amazing and quite fun. And to know you have that amazing on top of your shelf written. That's beautiful. That's an amazing, and I love the fact that to me, I think this is something quite exceptional as it tends to help to preserve family history. Stories of grandfathers of great. Because I often wish someone would be available to tell me the story of my great 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 grandfather. As a curious being that I am, sometimes I will ask my father, "Tell me more about your grandfather. Tell me more about your father." I'll ask my grandmother, "Tell me more about your mother. Do you know about your grandmother? I mean, those that come
Yes.
before you, and before you." It's an exciting thing to tell, as one generation passes over another, it's very important, very great. And one thing about these things is the fact that once you have something written, the generation that is coming will be very grateful to you for writing a story that impressively. Because sometimes I wish someone could tell me stories about these people I know nothing about. Stories about this person that bears Okonkwo. My family name. Stories about this person. Because I don't know who is Okonkwo. I don't know. I don't know. Stories about these
Yeah.
people. I wish I knew something, even a bit, even if it's just a small story, but we never get to hear about their story because it's dying from one generation to another, or they don't want to share the story, or one person is aware of it and the person dies in the process, and all of those stories keep dying as they keep dying over and over again. It's amazing to keep story rekindling, moving from one generation to another, and preserving family history. It's something very great. And I need to commend you for
Yes.
a work well done. This is very inspiring. I'm inspired, Karen.
I'm glad to hear that. I hope you'll read it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And also, there's another title of yours that I found to be quite compelling, and that's the one titled Tangled Lies. And I need to comment that your title names is as such as an absorbing one. Now, could you tell us a bit about the making of Tangled Lies as well? Beautiful cover.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to write a murder mystery. I'd never written a murder mystery, and I love reading them.
Yeah?
It's one of my favorite genres for reading, just like historical fiction is one of my favorites. And writing a murder mystery takes a different kind of mindset because you have to make sure that when people get to the end and they find out who the murderer is, they don't go, "What?" You don't want them to be like, "Where did it come from?" You want them to be, "Oh, yes, I should have seen that." You
Absolutely.
want them to be surprised,
Yeah.
but not right. So it was, I just love learning new things.
Mm.
So I started Tangled Lies, and it's a story of a Black woman who's 70 years old, and
Oh.
she comes home and finds her adult son brutally murdered in the first chapter.
Wow.
Brutally murdered. First 3 pages. And then 3 months later, she's in a car accident. And this young white woman, she's 25, Danny. So Vera is the older Black woman, and Danny is the young white woman.
Mm.
Danny sees this car crash, and it looks suspicious to her.
Mm.
And so the two women meet at the car crash and not easily, but come together
Mm,
over 2 weeks to solve the murder of Vera's oldest son.
mm,
And so again, it's short chapters, move, 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 um, fast moving plot, but also deep character development. The characters are flawed and fully realized and real people. And there's bad guys and of course, there is troubled romance because I always have to have some kind of, guy woman thing that isn't working the way it should. And
yeah.
so there's always a little, and there is sex in this one.
I love the sound of that. That reminds me of an author I interviewed like a week ago. He said, but no sex. And I was like, oh, Peter sounds disappointed, but we carry on. I was like, that's so funny. I love your take
A
on that. And I
little
love the fact.
sex is always good. It's all my books don't have actual sex in them, but this one has sex in it.
Oh wow, interesting actually. And I think you love incorporating romance in your book, even with the fact that the first one you mentioned being historical, fiction in genre, you have a bit of romance in it. And this you mentioning, even while it's still a murder mystery novel kind of novel, it's have a bit of romance in it. That's quite something amazing. I think you're probably a huge fan of romance or adding a tips of romance into your stories.
Yeah, because I enjoy reading it. I write what I like to read.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. And also, Karen, in each of your novels, there are societal issues woven through. And I think this is one thing that makes your writing to be quite exceptional. The fact that there are societal issues woven through each of them in a way that even readers can even relate to it and feel, oh, yeah, this is a reality I spot over there. And I'd like you to tell us about that and why you incorporated this in your writing. Not quite sure why.
Yeah. So I want books, of course, to entertain. I want, people to enjoy reading them and be
Yeah.
entertained. But I try to lift real societal issues that the people are fighting.
Mm,
So all of my books are multiracial, and racism plays a role.
mm,
My
wow.
grandmother was mixed race. Vera in Tangled Lies is Black.
Mm,
All my books have different races in it,
yeah.
and racism is real. And I don't hit people over the head with it, but it's there. It's there.
Yeah.
Also, I lift the issue of Me Too and
Mm,
misogyny. Women are in True Grace, even though it was a time when women had finally gotten the vote,
mm,
maybe 2 years before the book started, a couple of years before,
yeah.
and flappers were taking off their girdles and taking off their bras, and the skirts went a little higher. Doesn't mean that misogyny wasn't still rampant, that it wasn't still, the women were fighting against a culture that was ingrained. So it wasn't easy being a woman. And then the flappers were young white women of means. Grace was a married woman with 5 children. She couldn't be a flapper. She couldn't throw
Wow.
away her girdle. She had to,
Wow.
she was a housewife.
Mm,
So misogyny and Me Too, and then in my new book that we're going to talk about,
mm.
I have whole issues of the unhoused and hungry and addiction. So I
Oh,
try to make
wow.
sure that throughout all the books, I'm lifting a societal issue in a way
Mm,
that doesn't slow the story or hurt the story, but informs,
mm.
uh, gives people something to think about.
That's a very great technique you've got in there. And I think this is one of the amazing techniques that tends to keep a reader glued to a book. Once they're reading a story, they're falling into the characterization. The story have its own story to tell, and in it, the incorporation of societal issue that they can stop, ponder on, and continue, and even sometimes apply to their own life if they find a bit of, resonance to it, something like that. It's something quite exceptional in the art of storytelling. and the art of writing as a novelist. I think you've incorporated something very great to captivate your readers in there with the societal issues woven into it.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And I'd also like us to talk about, getting it right. Could you briefly tell us about the making of that as well? Getting it right.
Yeah,
One
so
of your titles.
that
Yeah.
was first book. This was my very first
Oh,
novel.
yeah. Let's talk about
Lots of
it. Beautiful
authors.
cover.
Thank you. You see the danger,
Very beautiful.
the
A
shadow, and
lot in there. That's an amazing
yes.
design. Wow.
So, lots of authors don't ever get their first book published,
Yeah.
the first one they ever wrote.
Mm,
They'll always tell you that, they wrote one and then they wrote another one and then finally they got one published. That was really the first novel that I ever wrote and, found an agent and got a publisher. And
mm,
it was because these two women, Kara and Alex, so they were talking to me in my head. So I had to write their story because they said, stop the car, write this down. So I had to,
I
had
love
to
that.
write their story. So Alex is a young white woman. She's 30 years old. She was raised in dysfunctional privilege. And on the eve of her father's death, he calls her to his
Mm,
bedside. He had a massive heart attack and says to her, I need you to find the child I left behind.
mm. Wow.
Kara is mixed race and shares the father with
Mm,
Alex,
yeah.
but they never met each other. They never knew, they don't know each other or that they each other exist.
Mm,
And Kara grew up in foster care,
mm,
another one of the issues I lift. And she grew up and aged out of foster care in America.
mm,
You turn 18 in some states, 21 in others, and they just kick you out, and you're just on your own. And a huge percentage of girls become pregnant within, a few years of getting kicked out. 50% are unemployed. I mean, coming out of foster care, 62,000 children a year in America
wow.
get kicked out of
Wow.
foster care with no help, no anything.
Wow.
So that's what happened to Kara.
Mm,
And the story is about Alex. Her father asks, you have to go find her. So over 2 weeks in March, Alex goes to find Kara, and we see Kara's story and what's happening to her. And you see Alex trying to find her. And then what happens when they they're found, when they find each other. And Alex kind of expects Kara to be grateful.
mm.
And Kara's like, where have you been? I'm 30 years old. Now he wants to see me. Now he wants to, where was he all those
All
years
this
that she was
while.
suffering,
All the
right?
years.
All those years. And they both have siblings, and Alex has a crazy mother, and there's insider trading, and there's bad boyfriends, and
Mm,
page turner. Essence magazine named it a summer best read when it came out,
wow.
and it was one of my first book. Kara and Alex, love them, getting it right.
Congratulations on that. And I think I love your take on this. And I love your subject lines into the book. I love the themes it touched a bit in there. Because it's something that is actually quite relatable. We see in our current world, the stories you just shared. Where were you all this while? I'm just this talented and you want to come back. I mean, where have you been all this while? I've been going through all of this pain all alone. These are things you can find in the society today. Another further, you said, the characters were like, stop the car and get a story out of my head. That's an amazing thing. I wish some of my characters can tell me that too. Because sometimes when they come to my head, write me, Peter, I'll be like, oh no, hold on a while. I will do that later. And one thing about this thing is, once they come to you and you tell them to ignore you, they won't come that the exact way in terms of putting them down directly. So I would like my character to tell me to stop the car in a forceful manner in my head and say, get a pen and write this down.
I always have a notebook with me, always. Right? Do you hear a word? and you think, oh, I love that word. I got to work it in somewhere. And
Yeah.
I see somebody on an airplane and I like the way they look and I write down their
Write it
description
down.
because somehow,
Absolutely.
but these women, oh my gosh, they were
Wow.
so insistent.
Wow. That's
So I
impressive.
did.
Yeah, that's impressive. And I'm coming back to the subject of inspirations and ideas very shortly. Now I'd like to ask you too. You don't write in one genre. And this is one thing I find to be quite amazing about your literature works. The fact that it spans different genres of literature is quite commendable. You don't write in one genre, from family drama to historical to modern mystery to romance. Why did you choose to do this, rather than sticking with one? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So if you really want to make money in writing in general,
Yeah.
writing in one genre really helps because then you build a following, of people who
Time.
love historical fiction, let's say. And
Yeah,
so if all of my books were historical fiction, I would have been building a following of historical
absolutely.
fiction lovers. Also, if you do sequels,
Mm,
so if you do one book and then the next book is a series, part of that other book.
mm.
But alas, I didn't do any of those things. I didn't do any of those things. I just I just write what at the moment I
Wow.
want. I write my characters have to talk to me. And
Mm,
if nobody's talking to me, then I can't write. So I can't sit and say, okay, I need to write another historical fiction because True Grace is doing so well. So I need to
yeah.
sit down and write another historical fiction. And I'm listening, but nobody is talking to me. And then
Mm,
somebody starts talking to me, and it's a totally different book and a different
absolutely.
genre. So
Honestly,
I just follow my characters, even though it would be smart if I stuck to a genre.
interesting. That's an amazing one, and I can relate to most of the things you mentioned. They're quite true. And your answers so far, actually, to me, have been quite educative, well illustrative, very great, and quite pulling, very literature-wise as well. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I
It was a
like
good
us to
question.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like us to talk about your new novel in the name of Justice for Emerson, which is set to be released on March 13th of next year, 2025. I'd like to ask you, what is it about?
So I'd love to tell you about it, but you didn't ask me about Reckonings, my little middle child. This is my middle child, and she needs
Okay,
love. You know how middle children, like the oldest one gets all the love, and then the baby gets all the love, and middle kids, like,
okay.
they just get lost.
Let's see
This
what
is my
happens in
middle
Reckoning.
baby.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do Reckoning.
Okay,
Beautiful
and then I'll tell
cover,
you all
even.
about Justice for Emerson. So
Oh,
Reckonings, which is an award-winning book, um, Roxy is uh, she's 35 years old, and
wow,
she feels old. She has four kids. Her oldest kid is pregnant, won't tell her who the father is.
wow.
She and her husband and her four kids and two dogs, two rescue dogs, live in a teeny tiny apartment. They work at jobs they don't like. And
Mm,
she just feels, just broken down. But
wow.
she has two things, one good thing and one bad thing.
Yeah.
So her good thing is that in 9 days, all my books except for True Grace take place over 2 weeks. So in
Wow.
9 days,
Really? Interesting.
she has a play coming
Taking her
out
to
in the
play.
local community theater. Do you know what a community theater is?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So she has this play coming out in a local community theater, and in her mind, it's going to make it to Broadway. And she's going to have enough money so
Mm,
that she can buy a little house for her family and they can leave the job they hate and start their own little business.
mm,
So that's her unrealistic think that somehow this little play is going to solve all her problems.
mm,
On the other side, he also has a secret
mm.
that 18 years ago, she was raped by ex-boyfriend, and
Wow.
he is the father of her oldest child,
Wow.
maybe, but he thinks he is. And he's just come back to town. He's rich. He's going to save the town, and he wants access to who he believes is his child.
Mm,
So, and Roxy never told her husband, she never told her daughter, she never told anybody but her best friend.
mm,
So the story is about, um, what's happening with the play,
yeah,
because of course things go wrong.
yeah,
What's happening with Spider, who's back, causing trouble,
yeah.
and how she navigates this. Still not telling her husband. She's going to tell him. She's going to tell him. She's going to tell him. But of course, what could go wrong?
Mm.
Everything can go wrong. So it's a very, yeah,
Wow.
my middle child.
Oh, wow. That's an amazing story you've got in there.
Reckonings. And then, thank you for asking me about my new book,
Taste by Marson.
Justice for Emerson. So I wanted to try something totally different,
Yeah.
but in a way. So I want to go back to murder mystery
Mm,
because Reckonings has trauma and Grace has trauma.
yeah.
And I thought, and getting it right had trauma. So I thought, I'm done with trauma. I think I want to write about murder. Murder. And so
Mhm.
Aria is so it takes place, it's a dual timeline. So over 2 weeks in April, Aria is the CEO of a not-for-profit, and it helps the unhoused, the hungry, people looking for jobs, people in poverty.
Mm,
And she has showers and food. She feeds people, and she has classes, and she's all about helping people who are in need.
mm,
And one of her volunteers, Emerson,
yeah.
is a 70, she's 50 and a widow. She's a recent widow. And Emerson is 77 and he's a Vietnam veteran
Mm,
and he's a volunteer and
wow.
he helps her in the not-for-profit. And when the story opens, she finds Emerson brutally murdered in
Wow.
the not-for-profit's basement. And so the story is about how she tries to, with the local policeman and with Jackson. I'll tell you about Jackson in a minute. Aria's Black,
Mm,
um, and so is Emerson. How she tries to solve the murder, but the
yeah.
dual timeline is we meet Emerson in 1968
Wow.
when he was on his way to Vietnam on the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated,
Mm,
questioning like, why am I, why am I doing this? Why am I going to fight a fight in a country that I don't know anybody? And back home, they treat me like crap. And now they've murdered King. And so Emerson, so that's how his story starts in 1968.
yeah.
And then while she's solving the murder, we
Yeah.
learn about Emerson and how we got to where we are.
Wow.
But now there is the romance. So Jax Aria is 50
Yeah.
and she's Black. And Jax is 40
Okay.
and he's white.
Okay.
Aria is 5'2" and Jax is 6'2".
Interesting.
And Jax is also rich. He's a donor to the not for profit.
Yeah.
And so he's really interested in Aria.
Mm,
And she says, but he's too tall. Like, how do tall people make love with little people like me? They have to lift you work. So he's too tall.
I knew
He's
something
too
was gonna
young
happen,
because he's
Karen.
he's 10 years younger than she is. So he's too young.
Yeah.
He's too rich
Mm,
because she's afraid that, if people would say that she only wanted him for his money and,
yeah.
because he's a donor.
Yeah.
And it's too soon. Oh, and he's too white. And it's too soon because Ben has only been dead for 2 years.
Oh,
So all of that is
interwoven
happening
all
all through
together.
with the murder and the police officer who's helping them really likes her too, and so it's quite
It's a
it's a
lot.
big
A
story.
lot. You've got a lot going on in that story all alone. From this short illustration and answers you've given, you've got a lot going on in the story. And while you were speaking, you did mention something that most of your novels happen or takes place within 2 weeks. I'm curious, how realistic is that? Do you mean the whole story started within 2 weeks and everything ends within 2 weeks? More like you're telling a story via movie or you're watching a movie and everything starts in a day, two, three. There's some movies that spans from, okay, 1 month later, 1 year later. The story that I'm writing, my Fox novel that I'm currently working on, it's a long story that takes within a span of, say, 5 years, because I jumped some years from 5 years to 6 to 7 to 8, and I make it that very long. Yeah, but to hear about a story that takes within 2 weeks, it's quite surprising. I'd like you to tell me more about that. How you're able to
Yeah,
utilize the duration of the time into the story. Yeah, I'm not sure if you get what I mean, right?
I do. I understand. So the reason I like, I think I was taught that you should keep your story in a crucible,
Mm,
that where there's the fire under it,
yeah,
right? And things are, you want to keep it tight in the
yeah.
crucible. So I do through flashbacks.
Oh,
You find out all kinds of things that happened,
the past.
before in little, but I just dropped them in. I dropped them in carefully, 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 not big chunks of it at a time. I
Mm,
drop in flashbacks.
wow.
So it keeps the story, the 2 weeks. You do find out you do see a scene of what happened to Roxy, for example, when she was 18. You do see, um,
Wow.
how they met. You see things about the family,
Mm,
but the action is in the 2 weeks. Now, with Justice for Emerson,
mm,
I do what you just said. The story, his part of the story takes decades,
yeah,
right? So, but I jump from decade to decade. So you see how
absolutely.
he became addicted. You see what happened to him and his struggle with drugs. You meet all kinds of bad guys in his life as he's moving forward, wondering which of these bad guys killed him
Yeah.
as you're moving forward. But Arya's story
Mm,
takes place just in 2 weeks as she
wow.
tries to solve it. But there are flashbacks. You meet her husband, and in flashbacks. So that's how I write them.
I must say you've
This
got I must say you've got an interesting style of writing. I mean, from this sounds to me like a writing workshops. And this is one of the things you get to hear from, writers who are giving writing workshops, how a story can go. Or you have a gathering of writers who are looking forward to becoming novelists and they want to know how stories are made up. How you made up
mm,
story, how you transition from one plot to another, how you utilize characterization, how you bring in flashbacks, like you just mentioned, not just jumping a bunch of it. Because if you jump a bunch of it in the middle, it might confuse the reader a bit. But bringing it a bit of it along the line in one chapter, I mean, the way you're using your hand to top it one after the other makes it be quite interesting. I must say, I'm well invested in your writing style, which I find to be very quite amazing. Really, that's very beautiful.
thank you,
Interesting style
thank
you've
you.
got in there. Now let's talk about your video podcast. You're a video podcaster. What are you reading? What are you writing? And it talks over 200 episodes, which is quite a lot of works you've got in there already ongoing. I'd like to ask you, what would a viewer find on your vlog? And what's the name? And I think I have to add a link in the description part of this
Thank
interview to
you.
read.
So it comes out every Tuesday and occasionally on a Thursday, and plus occasionally on a Thursday, but every Tuesday, no matter what. And then sometimes I add a Thursday because maybe an author has a publication date,
Yeah.
and I want to do it on their publication date.
Okay.
But I interview authors, and I let them do. I do what you do. I let them tell about their story.
And
I ask them what they're reading. Do they have books to recommend? So you not only find out about their books and their writing style, but you also learn about new books that they're reading and that they would highly recommend. I ask about books that have had an impact on their life. And so they talk about, their books that shape them as writers. I just anybody who asks me, I pretty much let them, be on. And it's fun. People, and because a lot of writers are kind of quiet and introverted. They want to
yeah.
just stay with their. So they like me interviewing them because I help them shine and enjoy the conversation. So every Tuesday, what are you reading? What are you writing? But I have a question for you. You have so many views, and I have this many views, and I've been doing this for almost 4 years. You
Oh,
have to tell me how I can get my
oh.
my YouTube channel so I have more people watching my show. All of you people watching this, go to YouTube, Karen E. Osborne, watch my show.
Yeah, first of all, I was going to mention that now I can understand why we have such a good flow and a great flow. Because, of course, I'm speaking to a fellow author interviewer. And, there's something about being a host of a show, being very lively. You have to be a lively person. You can be a boring person and have a show on the way. It's not going to work, yeah? You have to be a very lovely person. Look at your smile. I mean, you've been smiling all day over. We've jumped on the interview. The energy is flowing beautifully. The conversation is going smoothly. You know what you're talking about. You know the literature you're talking about. And it's quite amazing. Yeah, I was like, oh, now I can understand why we have such a beautiful and wholesome. More like you mentioned, most writers are quite introverted. Oh, I want to stay in my shell. I don't want to talk too much about myself. I don't want people to know about my writing. Oh, give me something to cover my face. Yeah, things like that. Yeah, but when it comes to, and it's quite shocking, really, to get to know you've been doing it for the past 4 years. I think one thing that might make it a bit different is the fact that apart from YouTube, we are all over everywhere. Pinglish is on Facebook. We have a group on Facebook with over 2,100 people. Then also, when I was very active on Facebook, I'm still trying to be active, but I got some issue with my account in the past year. We are over a group of 98,000 members, which I happen to be moderator of, called the Goodreads Society on Facebook. I need to get back in there. And I
Mm,
belong to several other groups. So once all of these things are done, they're being pushed into those groups in the message box, in the Facebook groups, on via
mm,
email, on our X channel, on WhatsApp messages. Yeah, we have a WhatsApp broadcast on WhatsApp. We have other several writings group on WhatsApp where we post our thoughts. So we do a sort of an extensively sharing far and wide to reach more people. Because I come to think of it, one of the beauty of writing, it's something to write a book. It's another thing to get to hear people know what you've written about. And as such, well, I try
yeah.
my best. And I'm not the only one. Nowadays, I don't even do much sharing. My literature assistants do all of the sharing and push it. Once this one is up, and also I'm gonna have to leave a link in the description part of this interview to your YouTube channel where people can get to subscribe to you. Now, whoever is watching this, I'd like you to go head over to Karen Osborne's YouTube channel and give her a subscription. Please support and let's carry on the good news from in there. Perhaps I've been able to help that way.
Thank you. Thank you. Karen E. Osborne. Because
Yeah,
there's a Karen Osborne out there who writes, and she
I'm
doesn't have
actually
the
gonna
E.
leave a link to it. I will attach
Right.
the link.
Good.
Yeah, in the
Thank you.
description. I mean, this has been amazing so far. Very wholesome. And I can go on and on and on and on and on. Because of our time, I need to cut it short. And I'd like to ask you, for the sake of readers or viewers who are currently watching the interview, I would love to get a copy of any of your books. On what platform are they available on for purchase?
So you can go to Amazon, you can go to Barnes and Noble, you can go to Goodreads, you can go to the library, you can go to, any place that you normally buy your books. And if
Yeah.
they don't have it, just ask them. They'll get on their computer and see that it's legitimate, and they'll
Yeah.
order it for you. So, and please, if you do read them, please write a
Review.
review. We
Very
live and
important.
die by reviews.
Mm. Yeah, every authors love reviews, so that's very important. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested
Yeah.
viewers can get a copy of Karen Osborne's books directly on Amazon, Barnes& and Nobles, on our website, and also another platform. I also left link to our social media pages, including our YouTube channel, for possible followings. So thank you so much, Karen, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I must say this is more than awesome. Very great, quite lovely, animated, energetic, lively, well grounded into literature conversation. And I need to say thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun meeting you, and I enjoy following you. I've watched many of your shows, and they're always so interesting. So thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure as well. Thank you.